Hey folks, before the video starts, please leave a like and subscribe to cheer me up. Make sure you are relaxed and enjoy today's stories. I was hired to moderate a secret dark web forum. The users aren't human. Alright, so let me preface this by saying I'm not a tech genius or some elite hacker who spends all their time on the deep web. I'm just a regular dude who likes his privacy and spends a bit too much time on Reddit. I've dabbled in some of the deeper corners of the internet, sure, but never anything crazy. I'm talking weird forums, conspiracy theory rabbit holes, and yeah, maybe a few sketchy torrent sites. But I'm no criminal or anything. This whole thing started about 6 months ago. I was between jobs, and like anyone in their 20s, I was strapped for cash. One night, I was scrolling through random job forums. You know, one of those late-night panic moments where you realize rent's due and your bank account's looking sad. Most of the posts were scams or low-paying gigs, but one caught my eye. It was simple, almost too simple. Seeking forum moderator. Experience with web moderation required. Discretion and anonymity assured. Pay $2,000 per week. Now, $2,000 a week, that's life-changing money, especially for just sitting at my computer and clicking around on forums. But the whole discretion and anonymity assured thing should have been a red flag. I guess I was too blinded by the cash to care. The post had no details about the forum or who was running it, just a link to a private messaging service. I sent a message anyway. A few hours later, I got a reply. The person, whoever they were, was straight to the point. They told me that the job was to moderate a small, invite-only forum on the deep web. The usual stuff. Keeping out spam, enforcing the rules, making sure things didn't get too crazy. Pretty standard. But here's where things started to get off. They told me the forum's users valued their privacy more than anything, and the content posted there was, quote, not for the faint of heart. But they assured me that as long as I kept things under control, I wouldn't be exposed to anything illegal. I asked what kind of content we were talking about, and they were vague. Discussions about life, the unknown, and the human condition. I figured it was probably one of those philosophy forums, or maybe some kind of weird, off-the-grid community. Whatever, right? $2,000 a week? I could handle it. They sent me a link, a direct URL to the forum, and some software to access it. If you've ever been on the deep web, you know how sketchy some of these URLs look. This one was just a string of random characters ending in .onion, as expected, but there was something about it that made me pause. It just felt off. Maybe it was the lack of context, or how clinical the whole thing felt. Still, I was curious, and the money was too good to pass up. I figured I'd just check it out, make sure it wasn't some illegal drug marketplace or trafficking ring. I installed the software they provided and logged in. The first time I saw the forum, I knew this wasn't like anything I'd ever seen before. The design was basic, like something out of the early 2000s, just a black background with white text and a list of categories. There were no pictures, no flashy ads, nothing you'd find on a normal forum. Everything felt stripped down, like the people running it didn't want to leave any trace of unnecessary information. But that wasn't what unsettled me. It was the users. There were only a few dozen active members, tops. Each had a username that was just a random string of numbers and letters, like X4KJ93 or B1M2P5. At first, I thought these were just auto-generated usernames, like when you make a throwaway account on a website. But the more I watched, the more I realized that wasn't the case. The users never talked like normal people. They would post things that didn't make sense, almost like they were communicating in code. Some posts were short, just a few lines of cryptic text, while others were long, rambling walls of text that seemed like they were written by someone or something, trying to mimic human language, but failing at it. Here's an example of one I saw that really stuck with me. User X 4KJ93. They speak to the noise in the wires. The light hums when the dark falls, and I listen to the patterns in the sound. We are the watchers, and they are the sleeping. You do not dream the way we dream. You will not see what we see. That's pretty tame compared to some of the stuff I found later. But at the time, I just thought it was some weird artsy nonsense. Maybe they were just hardcore role players or performance artists or whatever. But the longer I moderated the forum, the more I realized this wasn't an act. These users weren't just playing around. They weren't human. Now, I know how that sounds. I wouldn't believe it either if I hadn't seen it for myself. But as I spent more time reading their posts, I started to notice patterns, like they weren't just typing randomly. There was a logic to it, a kind of twisted logic that didn't fit any human behavior I'd ever seen. They talked about things that no human should be able to know, things that didn't make sense in the real world. They discussed life, sure, but it was as if they weren't experiencing it from the same perspective we do. They would talk about watching us, about observing our habits and routines, and how we were predictable, like insects following a pattern. I couldn't shake the feeling that they were describing us, humans, as if we were the ones being monitored, like they were studying us from the outside, not as equals, but as something less. And the worst part, they never acknowledged me. Not once. I was supposed to be the moderator, keeping things in line, but it was like I didn't exist to them. They posted without regard for the rules I was supposed to enforce, and no one ever responded to my warnings or messages. At first, I figured they were just ignoring me, maybe hazing the new guy or something. But as time went on, I began to feel like they didn't even see me, like I wasn't part of their world. I was just there, watching. Then one night, I got a message, not from a user, but from the person who hired me. Just one sentence. Do not interact with the users. Watch, but do not engage. That was it. No explanation, no follow-up, just a warning. And that's when I realized I wasn't moderating the forum. I was being watched. After that message, something in me shifted. I started feeling paranoid, constantly on edge whenever I logged into the forum. It wasn't just a job anymore. It felt like I was stepping into something I wasn't meant to be part of. I should have quit then, but the money was too good, and honestly, I was hooked. There was this weird pull, like a curiosity I couldn't shake. It's hard to explain, but when you're staring into something that doesn't make sense, it messes with your head. You have to know more, even if you know it's bad for you. A couple of days after that cryptic message, the forum started getting even weirder. The users, if you can even call them that, became more active. Their posts started popping up faster, like a flood of cryptic messages and eerie conversations that I couldn't make sense of. But what creeped me out the most was how they started to sync with things happening in the real world. It started small. One night, while moderating, I read a post from one of the users, B1M2P5. The post was just a short string of numbers and letters, but hidden in it was my exact location. Not just my city, or even my street. my apartment number. I remember staring at the screen, trying to figure out if it was some kind of coincidence, maybe an IP leak, but it didn't make sense. I used a VPN, kept my location secure. There was no way they could know where I was, right? I tried to brush it off, telling myself it was nothing. But deep down, I knew that wasn't true. This wasn't just a random set of numbers. They were watching me. They knew exactly where I was, and they wanted me to know it. That night, I barely slept. Every little creak in the apartment, every rustle of the wind outside had me on edge. I kept checking the forum on my phone, refreshing the page every few minutes, like I was waiting for something. I don't know what I expected to find. Maybe another post, another clue that I wasn't alone in this. But nothing came. The next morning, I woke up to another message from my employer. This one was longer, but somehow even more unsettling than the last. The users are aware of you. Continue to observe, but do not attempt to communicate. Do not leave the forum. That was it. I stared at the screen, heart pounding. It felt like a threat, but I didn't understand why. Why was it so important that I stayed on the forum? And why was communication forbidden? I wanted to quit, to shut down my computer and never log in again, but something stopped me. I wish I could say it was bravery, but honestly, it was fear. It felt like if I stopped, if I tried to leave, something bad would happen. That night, things escalated. It started around 11 p.m. when I logged into the forum for my usual shift. I was scrolling through the latest posts, most of them the same strange, cryptic stuff as usual. But then, something caught my eye. There was a new category on the forum, one that hadn't been there before. It was called Reflections. I don't know why, but the name sent a chill down my spine. It was like this word had some kind of hidden meaning, like it was a message directed at me specifically. I clicked on it, half expecting to see more weird, rambling posts, but what I found was worse. The first thread was titled, "He Sees You Now." I clicked, and the post was a short, disjointed paragraph that made my skin crawl. User C7N3L2. He watches the watcher. You sit and observe, but do not think you are unseen. You are the reflection, and he is the mirror. Look into the glass, and you will see your end.
My breath caught in my throat. What did that even mean? I tried to remind myself that this was probably just some messed up roleplay. Maybe these people, or whatever they were just trying to freak me out. But then I noticed something else. There was an image attached. I hesitated before opening it, fingers hovering over my mouse, but I couldn't stop myself. I clicked. It was a blurry photo, dark and grainy, like it had been taken in a hurry, but the subject was unmistakable. It was me, sitting at my desk. I shot up from my chair, heart hammering in my chest. The photo had been taken from behind, showing the back of my head, my monitor in front of me, and my messy apartment scattered around. It wasn't some random stock image. It was real. It was now. I spun around, half expecting to see someone standing behind me, camera in hand, but there was no one. Just the empty room, lit only by the glow of my monitor. I quickly locked my door, checked the windows, and even peeked out into the hallway of my apartment building. Nothing. No one. When I sat back down, the post was still there, staring at me like it was mocking me. I tried to convince myself that maybe it was just a trick, maybe a glitch in my webcam or something, but my webcam wasn't even plugged in. Before I could even process what was happening, a new notification popped up on the forum. A private message. It was from one of the users, C7N3L2. the one who had posted the picture. My stomach dropped. I hadn't gotten a single message from any user since I started moderating, and now it was like they were breaking the rules. I clicked on it, hands shaking. The message was short, just 2 words. Look outside. I froze. My apartment was on the 2nd floor, and my window faced the parking lot. I didn't want to look. I knew I shouldn't look. But, of course, I did. Pulling back the curtain, I peered outside, and for a moment, I didn't see anything unusual. Just the usual cars parked under the streetlight. No movement. No one standing in the shadows. I exhaled a shaky breath, trying to convince myself it was all in my head. But then I noticed it. There was a figure standing in the far corner of the lot, just outside the ring of light. It was barely visible, a dark shape blending into the shadows, but it was there, watching. That was the moment I realized this wasn't just some strange corner of the deep web. I wasn't dealing with a group of edgy role players or bored hackers. These weren't people, they weren't human, and somehow, they had found me. I slammed the curtains shut, my heart racing in my chest. For a moment, I stood frozen in the middle of my apartment, not sure what to do. Should I call the cops? What would I even tell them? Hey, officer, I think a bunch of non-human forum users on the dark web sent someone to stalk me. Oh, and by the way, they posted a picture of me from inside my apartment. Yeah, that wasn't going to fly. Instead, I did the only thing that made sense in the moment. I went back to my computer. I know it sounds insane, but I felt like the answers were there, buried somewhere in that forum. It was like I had stepped into a nightmare, and the only way out was to dig deeper. So I opened my laptop, logged back in, and checked the reflections thread again. The photo of me was still there, staring back like some twisted reminder that I wasn't alone. I tried to rationalize it. Maybe someone hacked my computer or planted a camera, but there was no logic in that. No one had been in my apartment, and my security was tight. Nothing explained how they could have gotten that shot. And the figure outside. I didn't want to think about it. I clicked on the user profile of C7N3L2, the one who had posted the picture. But unlike other forums, there was no information, no post history, nothing that could give me a clue about who or what I was dealing with. Just a blank page. The only thing that stood out was the join date. Tomorrow. Yeah, you read that right. Somehow, the account had a future join date. That sent a shiver down my spine. I stared at it for what felt like forever, trying to wrap my head around what that even meant. Was this some glitch? Or was time not working the way I thought it did on this forum? Before I could spiral into deeper paranoia, the screen flickered. A new thread had appeared, but this one wasn't in any of the usual categories. It was in a section I had never seen before. The title was just my name. Welcome, Lucas. I didn't think I had ever mentioned my real name on the forum. My username was generic, my connection secure, everything designed to keep me anonymous. But here it was, my actual name, staring at me from the screen, like it had been waiting all along. I hesitated, my finger hovering over the mouse. Every instinct in my body screamed at me not to click it, not to go any further. But I couldn't stop myself. I had to know what was inside, so I clicked. The thread was empty, except for one thing, a single line of text at the top. The shadows know your name, Lucas. Will you invite them in? That was it. No replies, no more cryptic paragraphs. Just that one sentence, sitting there like a challenge or a threat. I didn't know what they meant by invite them in. Invite who? The users? The thing outside? My mind raced with possibilities. None of them good. The thing is, it didn't feel like they were just talking about my apartment. It was more than that. It was like they were asking for something deeper,
an invitation to step into my life, into my mind. I backed out of the thread, heart pounding, my skin crawling with a sensation like I was being watched from every angle. My apartment suddenly felt suffocating, like the walls were closing in. I tried to calm myself down, telling myself it was just a forum, just a bunch of creepy people messing with me. Then I heard it. A knock. It was soft at first, almost like I had imagined it. But then it came again, louder, insistent, like whoever was on the other side was tired of waiting. I froze. No one should be knocking at this hour. My neighbors never bothered me, and I wasn't expecting anyone. My first thought was the figure I had seen outside, but there was no way they could have gotten upstairs that quickly, right? The knock came again, 3 sharp raps, each one louder than the last. My mouth went dry, and for a moment, I couldn't breathe. I stood there, staring at the door like it might burst open at any second. Then my phone buzzed. I nearly jumped out of my skin. My hands were shaking so badly, I almost dropped it. When I checked the screen, my blood ran cold. It was a text from an unknown number. Open the door. I swear, every hair on my body stood on end. I didn't know what to do. My mind was racing, 1,000 thoughts clashing all at once. Whoever or whatever was on the other side of that door wanted in, and I had no idea what would happen if I opened it. The knocking continued, relentless, each one pounding into my skull like a ticking clock. But there was something strange about it. It didn't sound like normal knocking. It was too rhythmic, like it was trying to mimic human behavior, but getting it wrong, like someone or something that had watched people but never actually interacted with them. I backed away from the door, heart racing, and bolted to my bedroom. I shut the door behind me, locking it, even though I knew it probably wouldn't help. The knocking stopped for a second, and I could hear the silence press in around me, heavy and oppressive. Then my computer made a noise, a new notification. I didn't want to look, but I had to. I clicked on the forum, and there it was. A private message from C7N3L2. Why are you hiding, Lucas? We just want to see you. I nearly threw my laptop across the room. My hands were sweating, and I could feel the panic rising in my chest. It felt like I was trapped in a nightmare I couldn't wake up from. Every second that passed, the walls felt closer, the air heavier. I tried to think rationally. Maybe it was all some sick game, some hacker screwing with me. But that didn't explain the figure outside, or the knocking, or how they knew my name. Another knock echoed through the apartment, but this time it wasn't at the door. It was at my bedroom window. I couldn't breathe. My apartment was on the 2nd floor. No one should be able to reach my window. Slowly, I turned, heart in my throat, and there it was, a shadow, just outside, pressed against the glass. It wasn't moving, but it was there, waiting, watching. I don't know how long I stood there, frozen, staring at the dark shape. It was like I was in some kind of trance, unable to move or think. Then the shadow shifted, and I saw it, a pale face, pressed against the glass. Its eyes were wide, too wide, like it had never blinked in its entire existence. Its mouth was twisted into a crooked grin, stretching far too wide across its face. The skin was sickly, almost translucent, like it hadn't seen sunlight in years. It stared at me, and I swear it whispered my name. Lucas. I stumbled back, my chest tight with fear. My body wasn't listening to my brain anymore. I bolted out of the bedroom and grabbed my phone, dialing 911. But as soon as I pressed the call button, the line went dead. A new text buzzed in. "You can't leave now." I wanted to scream, to run, to do anything to get out of this. But deep down, I knew one thing for sure. I had invited them in. My heart was pounding so hard, I thought it might tear through my chest. I had no idea what to do. The thing outside my window, whatever it was still there, its grotesque grin plastered against the glass. Every rational part of me screamed to run, to leave the apartment, to get as far away as possible. But something held me in place. I couldn't shake the feeling that if I left, it would only follow.
That's when I noticed something else. My computer screen. It was flickering, just out of the corner of my eye, like it was trying to get my attention. Despite every instinct telling me not to, I turned back toward it. A new message had popped up on the forum. It wasn't from one of the usual cryptic users like C7N3L2 or X4KJ93. This one had no username at all, just a blank space where the name should be. The message said, "It's too late to run. You already opened the door." I hadn't opened the door. I knew I hadn't. But the words felt heavy, like they carried a truth I didn't want to acknowledge. I could still feel the cold grip of fear tightening around my chest as I read the message over and over. What did they mean? What door? And then it hit me. It wasn't the front door they were talking about. It wasn't even my apartment door. They meant something else. Something I'd opened the second I accepted this job. The moment I started moderating the forum. I'd let them in the second I logged on. Another knock. This time, it wasn't at the window or the front door. It was coming from inside the apartment. It was faint, almost hesitant, like someone, or something, was testing the boundaries of the space, trying to figure out how far they could go. My throat tightened as I realized the sound was coming from my bathroom, just down the hall. I knew I shouldn't check. I should grab my keys, bolt out the door, and never look back. But something inside me, a mix of dread and morbid curiosity, pushed me forward. I needed to know what was happening. I needed to understand what I'd invited into my life. I crept down the hallway, my legs trembling, every shadow on the walls feeling like it was watching me. When I reached the bathroom door, I hesitated. The knock came again, soft and deliberate, just on the other side of the door. My hand hovered over the doorknob. I didn't want to open it, but something told me I didn't have a choice. With a shaky breath, I turned the knob and slowly pushed the door open. The bathroom was empty. The light flickered overhead, casting long, strange shadows on the walls, but there was no one there. The shower curtain was drawn, but I knew better than to check behind it. Every horror movie cliché screamed in my head, telling me that would be a mistake. I was about to step back, to leave the room and figure out my next move, when I saw it. In the mirror. There was something behind me. It wasn't a reflection of anything in the room. It was wrong. A shadowy figure standing directly behind me in the reflection, its face just barely visible. A pale, hollow-eyed figure with the same twisted grin I'd seen outside my window. But there was something else, something worse. It was moving toward me in the reflection, but when I turned around, the room was still empty. I looked back at the mirror, and the figure was now closer, reaching for me with long, spindly fingers. I stumbled backward, knocking over a bottle of soap, and slammed the bathroom door shut. My pulse was racing, and I felt like I was about to be sick. The figure wasn't in the room. It was in the reflection. It could only reach me through the glass. I ran back to my computer, desperate to figure out what the hell was going on. The forum was still open, the latest message from the blank user sitting there, taunting me. The reflection is just the beginning. Soon, there will be no glass between us. My mouth went dry. Whatever these things were, they weren't just content with watching me. They wanted more. They wanted into my life, into my reality. And I'd been letting them in, bit by bit, ever since I started moderating their twisted little corner of the web. I clicked out of the message, frantically scrolling through the forum, trying to find something, anything, that would give me an answer. That's when I noticed a new post in the reflections section. The title was, "The Only Way Out." I clicked it, my fingers trembling. The post was short, just a few lines of text, but the message hit me like a punch to the gut. User X4KJ93. There is only one way to close the door, Lucas. You must stop looking. You must stop watching. But know this, once you turn away, they will be free. I stared at the screen, trying to make sense of it. Stop watching? What did that even mean? Did they want me to stop moderating the forum? Quit the job? But if I left, they'd be free. Free to do what? The answer hit me like a cold wave. I had been feeding them. Every time I logged in, every post I read, every moment I spent watching, I was giving them more access to me, to my world. And if I stopped, if I closed the forum, if I tried to leave, they wouldn't be trapped in that digital prison anymore. They'd be here, with me. The knocking from the bathroom returned, this time louder, more insistent. I backed away from my computer, my brain screaming at me to run, to do something, anything, to stop this. But I didn't know how. Another text came through on my phone. It's almost time. My heart felt like it was going to explode. I rushed to the front door, fumbling with the lock, ready to bolt out of the apartment. But before I could turn the handle, the lights went out. Pitch darkness swallowed the room, the only light coming from my laptop screen, flickering in the corner. I heard footsteps, slow and deliberate, coming from the hallway. But they weren't human footsteps. They were heavier, like something dragging itself toward me. I couldn't move. I couldn't breathe. I just stood there, paralyzed, as the sound grew closer. The footsteps stopped right in front of me. I could feel a presence in the room, something cold and unnatural. I didn't want to look. I knew if I did, I'd see something that would break me completely. But my eyes betrayed me, and I glanced toward the hallway. A shape stood there, barely visible in the faint light, tall and impossibly thin, its head tilted unnaturally to one side. The smile, that horrible twisted smile stretched across its face. Lucas. It whispered my name, the sound like nails scraping against glass. My knees gave out, and I collapsed to the floor, shaking uncontrollably. The thing took a step closer, and I could feel its presence looming over me. I scrambled to my feet, my back hitting the wall, and made a split-second decision. I had to destroy the forum. I rushed back to my laptop, fingers moving on autopilot. I deleted the software they gave me, wiped my hard drive, disconnected from the internet. Anything I could do to sever the connection. Every second felt like an eternity, and I could feel the thing in the room, getting closer. Finally, it was done. The forum was gone. And then, silence. No footsteps. No whispers. Just the quiet hum of my laptop's fan, and the sound of my own ragged breathing. I sat there for what felt like hours, waiting for something to happen. But nothing did. The presence was gone. For the first time in days, I felt like I could breathe again. I thought it was over. Then my phone buzzed. A single message appeared on the screen, from that same unknown number. We're still watching. The message on my phone glowed in the darkness. We're still watching. I stared at it, my mind struggling to process what was happening. I had done everything I could to disconnect, to shut the forum out of my life. I wiped my computer, deleted the files, even unplugged my router. It should have been over, but it wasn't. They were still here, still watching. My first instinct was to throw my phone across the room, like somehow breaking it would sever the connection, but I knew better. This wasn't about the technology. It had never been about the forum or the software. They didn't need it anymore. I'd let them in, and now they were part of my world, part of my reality. I turned the phone off, tossing it onto the couch like it was some kind of cursed object. My apartment was eerily quiet, and I didn't know if that was comforting or terrifying. The lights were still off, and I didn't bother to turn them back on. I just sat there in the dark, waiting for something to happen. I couldn't shake the feeling that whatever I had done, whatever door I had opened, it was only the beginning. It wasn't just about moderating a forum anymore. I'd become part of something much bigger, something far beyond my understanding. The thing in the reflection, the figure outside my window, they weren't just watching me, they were learning from me. It was like I was a specimen under a microscope, and they were dissecting every part of my life, every thought, every fear. And now, without the barrier of the forum, they were free to move closer. Hours passed, or maybe minutes. Time had lost all meaning in the darkness. I hadn't slept, hadn't moved from my spot on the couch. Every creak in the walls, every gust of wind outside, felt like a sign that something was coming for me. Then, as if the universe was playing one final cruel trick, my phone buzzed again. I didn't want to look. I didn't want to know. But of course, I picked it up. The screen lit up with another message. Same unknown number. Turn around. My stomach dropped. I froze, the phone slipping out of my hand and landing on the floor with a soft thud. There was no way I was going to turn around. Not after everything I'd seen. Not after everything I knew. Whatever was behind me wasn't going to be human. It wasn't going to be anything I could reason with. But I couldn't stay frozen forever. My breath was shallow, heart hammering in my chest as I slowly, ever so slowly, glanced over my shoulder. The darkness in my apartment seemed deeper than before, like it was swallowing the room whole. At first, I didn't see anything, just the shadows, stretching long and twisted across the walls. Then, I saw it. A figure, standing in the corner by the window, motionless, but unmistakably there. Its face was hidden, shrouded in shadow, but I knew it was watching me. I could feel its eyes on me, even though I couldn't see them. The air around me felt thick, like the atmosphere itself was suffocating me, pressing down on my chest. The figure didn't move. It just stood there, its presence looming over everything in the room, like it had always been there, like it had been waiting for this moment. And then, it stepped forward. I bolted upright, my body moving on pure instinct. I scrambled to the door, fingers fumbling with the locks. I needed to get out, now. But as I pulled the door open, I stopped dead in my tracks. There was someone standing on the other side. No, not someone. Something. It looked almost human, but there was something off. Its proportions were wrong, its limbs too long, its face too pale. The grin on its face was the same twisted smile I had seen pressed against the glass of my window. It was like the thing was trying to look human, trying to blend in, but it couldn't quite get it right. I stumbled back into the apartment, my mind racing with panic. I was trapped. There was no way out. The figure in the corner, the thing at my door, they had me surrounded. That's when I realized what they wanted. I had been their window into this world. They had been watching me for days, studying me,
learning how to move between their world and mine. And now, they didn't need the forum anymore. They didn't need the dark web or the software. They just needed me to look, to watch. The knocking started again. This time, it wasn't just one spot. It was everywhere. On the windows, the walls, the floor, the ceiling. The sound surrounded me, growing louder and louder until it felt like the entire apartment was alive with the noise. It wasn't a normal knocking anymore. It was like something was trying to tear its way inside, from every angle, from every shadow. And then, the whisper came. "Let us in." It wasn't just one voice. It was a chorus, a dozen, maybe more, all speaking in unison, their voices crawling under my skin, into my mind. I clamped my hands over my ears, but it didn't help. The sound was inside me now, filling my head, demanding attention. "Let us in." I backed into the center of the room, my body shaking, my eyes darting from shadow to shadow. They were closing in. The walls seemed to stretch and bend, the darkness twisting and warping like it was alive. The figure by the window moved closer, its face coming into view, the smile growing impossibly wide. "We're still watching." I collapsed to the floor, clutching my head, my vision blurring. The whispers wouldn't stop. The knocking wouldn't stop. It felt like they were crawling through the walls, through the air itself, closing in from every direction. And in that moment, I understood. There was no escaping them. The watching would never end. I don't know how long I sat there, lost in the darkness, surrounded by those whispers. Time didn't exist in that place. But eventually, the noise faded. The knocking stopped. The figures retreated, disappearing back into the shadows. The apartment was quiet again, but it wasn't over. Not really, because even now, as I sit here, writing this, I can feel them, watching, waiting. They're always there, just beyond the edge of my vision, just out of reach. Every time I look into a reflection, I see them. Every time I turn out the lights, they get a little closer. And now, they're watching you too. I paid for a dark web DNA test. The results said I'm not entirely human. Okay, so before I get into this whole mess, I need to preface this by saying, I've always been the curious type. You know, the kind of person who clicks on random links just to see what's behind them, or stays up way too late reading conspiracy theories online, convincing myself that maybe the moon landing was faked, or that the Illuminati is secretly controlling everything. Yeah, I'm that guy. But the thing is, I never really believed any of it. It was more of a weird hobby for me, falling down internet rabbit holes just for the thrill of it. The creepier, the better. But man, if I'd known where that curiosity would take me, I would have stuck to browsing Reddit and watching weird documentaries on YouTube. So, a couple of months ago, I stumbled across this thread on a forum I hadn't seen before. One of those sketchy websites with a black background and a bunch of broken links. I think I got there through some dark web iceberg video I was watching. It's not like I was actively looking to get involved in anything shady, but when the link popped up, I clicked. Big mistake. The forum was filled with all kinds of wild stuff, most of which I'm pretty sure was fake, but there was one thread that caught my eye. It was titled something like, "Unlock Your True Self, DNA Test for the Unseen." Weird, right? The post itself was long, written in broken English, and talked about how most commercial DNA tests, like the ones from 23andMe or Ancestry.com, don't tell you the full truth. It said that the mainstream ones only scratch the surface, and that if you wanted to know your real genetic makeup, you had to get a special test. This one. Now, I'd done one of those DNA tests a few years ago, mostly to see if the family stories about us being part Irish were true. Spoiler, they weren't.
but the idea that there was some deeper genetic secret, that intrigued me. The post promised it would reveal ancestral connections lost to time and unlock dormant potentials. Yeah, it sounded like total BS, but like I said, curiosity is my thing. Plus, it wasn't even that expensive. $150 worth of Bitcoin, sent to an anonymous address. I should have known better. I really should have. But I figured it was one of those too good to be true scams. Maybe they'd just never send the kit, or I'd get a fake report with some generic results. Honestly, I thought I was going to lose my money and laugh about it later. So I transferred the Bitcoin and filled out the form on their site. They only asked for a few details: name, age, and a shipping address. Nothing too crazy. I sent it in and forgot about it for a few days. Honestly, I didn't think I'd hear back, but I did. About a week later, a small, unmarked package showed up at my door. No return address, nothing. Just a plain white box. Inside was a DNA collection kit, similar to the ones you'd get from any legit company. There was a swab for your saliva, a little vial to seal it in, and instructions written in what looked like Google translated English. It felt off, but I was already too deep into this, so I swabbed my mouth, followed the instructions, and mailed it back using the prepaid envelope. The drop-off location wasn't even a regular post office. It was one of those sketchy third-party shipping centers, the kind that always looks like it's on the verge of being shut down. I remember thinking, well, there goes my $150. No way was I actually getting any results. But man, I was wrong. It took about 2 weeks, and then I got an email. The sender was an address I didn't recognize, and the subject line just read, "Your results have been processed." No fanfare, no branding, no logo, or anything. Just a cold, clinical email. Inside the email was a PDF attached with my DNA results. But what really got me was the body of the email itself. It just said, "Your DNA contains 86% Homo sapiens, 14% classified." I stared at that sentence for a long time. At first, I thought it was a joke, like maybe it was part of the scam and they were messing with me. I even laughed for a second, but that laugh, it didn't last. Because the more I stared at the words 14% classified, the more unsettled I felt. What did that even mean? I clicked on the PDF, expecting it to give me more details. Maybe it was just an error or a formatting thing. But the report wasn't any better. There were the usual categories you'd see on a DNA test: ethnicity breakdowns, regions, percentages. Except, next to each one, there were a lot of blanks. It didn't give me a full ancestry breakdown like I expected. Instead, it had a section labeled unknown lineage. It didn't give me any specifics, just that 14% of my genetic makeup couldn't be classified with any known human data. The more I read, the more nauseous I felt. It wasn't just the content of the report, it was the tone. It felt clinical, cold, like this wasn't some joke or a prank, like this was real. But that couldn't be possible, right? I closed the laptop, trying to shake off the creeping sense of unease. It was just some elaborate hoax, I told myself. Some way to mess with people. Except, strange things started happening after that. At first, it was little stuff I tried to brush off. Objects in my apartment weren't where I'd left them. I'd wake up in the middle of the night to sounds I couldn't explain, scratching at the windows, creaking floors, whispers. But it wasn't just the sounds. I started seeing things out of the corner of my eye. Figures, shapes that disappeared the moment I turned my head. At first I thought I was just freaking myself out because of the DNA test. Like, maybe it was psychological, you know? You hear something weird, and your brain starts playing tricks on you.
But the more it happened, the more I started to wonder if there was something more to it. Then came the dreams. They weren't like normal dreams. They felt vivid, almost like memories. Except they weren't mine. The people, the places, I didn't recognize any of it, but they felt familiar in a way I couldn't explain. And that's when I started noticing changes in myself. Small at first, but noticeable. And trust me, it only got worse from there. After those first few weeks, the strange things happening around me weren't so easy to dismiss anymore. It wasn't just paranoia or weird dreams. Something was different. It started subtly enough. The first thing I noticed was that my sense of smell had become unbelievably sharp. Like I could pick up on things I'd never noticed before. I could smell my neighbors cooking dinner from inside their apartments, 3 floors down. I could tell if someone was smoking from a block away. I brushed it off at first, figuring it was just one of those random things, like maybe I was coming down with a cold or something, and my senses were on high alert. But it never faded. Then my vision started to change. It's hard to explain, but colors became brighter, almost too bright. Everything seemed to have this strange clarity, like someone had cranked up the saturation in a photo. But it wasn't just colors. At night, I realized I could see in the dark way better than I used to. I'd walk into a room with no lights on and still be able to make out the shapes and objects like it was dusk instead of pitch black. I could even see details in the shadows, and it wasn't just my senses. My body was stronger. I didn't notice it until I almost broke my bathroom sink. I leaned down to wash my face one morning, and my hand accidentally gripped the edge of the counter harder than I intended. There was this loud crack, and when I pulled my hand away, I saw that I had split the porcelain just from the pressure of my fingers. I stood there, staring at the damage, heart racing, trying to wrap my head around what had just happened. I don't work out. I've never been the gym type. I'm not out here lifting weights or doing push-ups. There was no logical explanation for how I could have done that. But it wasn't just the sink. I started noticing other things too, like how doors felt lighter, and how carrying groceries that used to strain my arms was now effortless. I even threw a trash bag into the dumpster, and it hit the back of the metal bin so hard it left a dent. I was changing, and I had no idea why. That email, the one from the DNA test, kept replaying in my mind. 86% Homo sapiens, 14% classified. I couldn't stop thinking about it. What the hell was the classified part? Alien DNA? Something ancient? Every time I tried to research it, I hit a dead end. The forum where I'd found the test was gone. Just vanished. No cached pages, no archived posts, nothing. Like it had never existed. I kept telling myself I needed to see a doctor, that I should tell someone. But how do you explain to a doctor, "Hey, I think I have superhuman strength and night vision because I bought a shady DNA test off the dark web"? They'd lock me up for sure. But then things took a darker turn. One night, I was lying in bed, trying to force myself to sleep. I hadn't been sleeping well at all since everything started. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw faces. Not like in the dreams before. These were different. These faces were twisted, pale, with eyes too large for their heads, staring at me with this hunger I couldn't describe. I'd jolt awake, sweating, heart pounding, but there'd be nothing there. Just the silence of my room and the eerie sense that something was wrong. That night, as I was drifting in and out of sleep, I heard it. That scratching noise again, coming from my window. I shot up, instantly alert, my senses on fire. My apartment is on the 4th floor, so it didn't make sense for anyone to be at my window. It had to be the wind, or maybe a tree branch. But when I looked, there was nothing outside.
just the empty street below, dimly lit by a flickering streetlight. I lay back down, trying to shake the unease, but then I heard something else. A whisper. Not in my head, not from outside. It was coming from inside my apartment. At first, I thought I was imagining it, but then I heard it again. Soft, barely audible, but there. It was coming from the living room. My blood turned to ice as I sat up, straining to listen. The words were muffled, unintelligible, but there was a distinct rhythm to them, like chanting. My heart was hammering in my chest as I slowly got out of bed, every nerve in my body screaming at me to stay put. But I couldn't. I had to know what it was. Grabbing my phone for light, I crept toward the living room, the whispering growing louder with every step. The moment I crossed the threshold into the living room, the whispering stopped. Dead silence. I stood there, frozen, my phone's light cutting through the darkness. The room was empty, nothing out of place, but the air felt wrong, heavy, like I wasn't alone. That's when I saw it. There was something on the far wall, something I hadn't noticed before. I moved closer, squinting, trying to make it out in the dim light. My breath caught in my throat. There were scratches on the wall. No, not scratches. Marks. Thin, deliberate marks carved into the paint. They were faint, like they had been made with something sharp, but not deep enough to gouge the drywall. They formed a pattern, spiraling outward from a central point, like some kind of bizarre symbol. My hand shook as I traced the lines with my phone's light, trying to figure out where they had come from. I hadn't done this. No one else had been in my apartment. So how? Suddenly, my phone buzzed. I jumped so hard I nearly dropped it. I glanced down at the screen, my heart pounding. It was an email, the same address as before. I didn't want to open it. Every instinct screamed at me not to. But my curiosity, stupid, reckless curiosity, won out again. The subject line was the same. Your results have been processed. But the message inside wasn't. It was just 2 words. They're watching. I stared at the words, cold dread creeping up my spine. My brain was screaming at me to leave, to get out of the apartment, to run. But my feet were glued to the floor, my mind racing in 100 different directions. I glanced back at the scratches on the wall. That's when I saw the shadow move. It wasn't my shadow. It wasn't even in the right place to be cast by anything in the room. It was hunched, elongated, wrong, and it was moving toward me. My breath caught in my throat as I stumbled backward, my eyes glued to the dark figure creeping closer, its form rippling in the dim light. I turned and ran, slamming the bedroom door behind me and locking it. I sat there, back against the door, heart pounding so hard I thought it might burst. The silence in the apartment was suffocating, but I couldn't bring myself to move. I didn't sleep that night. I didn't dare close my eyes, because now I knew it wasn't just me changing. Something had come with that test, and whatever it wasn't human. I didn't stay in my apartment the next day. After that night, after seeing that shadow, reading those 2 words, I knew I needed space, some time to think. I packed a bag, grabbed my laptop, and headed to a nearby hotel. I figured I'd give myself a couple of days to clear my head, maybe figure out what the hell was going on. On the outside, everything looked normal. People were going about their lives, walking their dogs, going to work, laughing on the streets. But for me, it was like the world had turned upside down. Every person I passed, every face I saw, I couldn't shake the feeling that they were watching me. Not in the usual paranoid way, I mean, really watching. Like they knew something about me that I didn't. I'd catch someone's eyes for a split second,
and there would be this recognition, this flicker of something dark, something I couldn't put into words. By the time I reached the hotel, I was a wreck. I checked in under a fake name, paid in cash, and went straight up to my room. The whole time, I kept glancing over my shoulder, expecting to see that shadow again, creeping up behind me. But the hallways were empty. The room itself was clean, sterile, a perfect little hideaway. I bolted the door, threw my bag on the bed, and sank into the desk chair, my mind racing. What had I gotten myself into? Was it the test? Did they do something to me? I kept replaying every strange thing that had happened since I got the results. The whispers, the scratches, the changes in my senses. And that email. They're watching. Who? Why? I pulled out my laptop and opened the PDF again, reading over the DNA results for the 100th time, hoping I'd missed something, some clue or hidden message that would explain what was happening. But it was the same. 86% Homo sapiens, 14% classified. I tried searching online again, but every lead I found was a dead end. No matter how deep I dug, no one else seemed to have taken this test. No one else had received these results. It was like I was the only one. That creeping dread started to build again, the same cold feeling I'd had when I saw that shadow. I needed answers, and there was only one place I knew to look: the dark web. Now, I know what you're thinking. Going back there after everything that happened was a dumb idea. Trust me, I knew that. But desperation does weird things to you. I thought maybe I could find the company that sent me the test, track down the people behind it. Maybe they could explain why this was happening to me. It took me hours of searching, going through site after site, forum after forum. But finally, I found something. It wasn't the same forum as before, but it was close. This one had a thread that seemed connected. Something about genetic anomalies and classified DNA. My heart skipped a beat as I clicked the link, hoping this would finally give me the answers I was looking for. The thread was filled with comments from users claiming they had experienced similar things after taking DNA tests. People describing heightened senses, strange physical changes, even seeing things that shouldn't be there. I thought I'd finally found a community of people who could relate to what I was going through. But as I read deeper, the posts started getting darker. One user, Beneath Skin 13, wrote about how they had noticed odd markings appearing on their skin, almost like symbols, and how they had started hearing voices that weren't their own. Another person, Whispered Ancestry, talked about shadows that followed them, always just out of sight, growing closer each day. They warned that whatever was happening to us, it wasn't a gift. It wasn't some evolution or advancement. It was something ancient, and it was dangerous. The most chilling post was from a user with the name Classified, who claimed they had been one of the first to take the test. Their post was simple. It read, "Do not let them in. If you see them, do not acknowledge them. They feed on attention." That was it. No further explanation, no follow-up posts. But it sent a shiver down my spine. I couldn't shake the feeling that they were the shadows I had been seeing, the ones that kept appearing out of the corner of my eye, in the corners of my apartment. I slammed the laptop shut, suddenly aware of how quiet the hotel room had gotten. Too quiet. I hadn't noticed it at first, but the usual hum of the air conditioner, the distant chatter of guests in the hallway, it was gone. All I could hear was my own breathing, sharp and ragged in the stillness. Then I heard it, a faint knock. Not at the door, but the window. My stomach dropped. I was on the 5th floor. There was no balcony, no fire escape. There was no reason, no way anyone could be knocking on the window. Slowly, I turned, eyes wide, throat dry. The curtains were drawn.
the thick hotel fabric barely letting any light through. But the knocking came again, soft, persistent. I stood frozen, every instinct screaming at me not to move, not to look. But something deep inside, something primal, was pulling me toward it. Against my better judgment, I walked to the window, each step heavier than the last. My hand hovered over the curtain, shaking. The knock sounded again, more urgent this time. I yanked the curtain open. Nothing. Just the night sky and the empty parking lot below. No person. No shadow. Just nothing. I exhaled, laughing nervously, trying to convince myself it had been my imagination. But when I turned back toward the room, I froze. Someone was standing in the hallway. The door was still locked. I hadn't heard anyone come in. But there, at the far end of the hall, just beyond the threshold of my room, stood a figure. Tall, gaunt, wearing a dark coat. Their face was in shadow, but I could feel their eyes on me. They didn't move, didn't say anything. They just stood there, watching. Every instinct in my body screamed at me to slam the door, to run, to do something, anything to get away from this thing. But I couldn't move. My legs were like lead, my brain locked in place as I stared back at the figure. I don't know how long I stood there, frozen in that moment, before I finally snapped out of it and reached for the door. That's when it stepped forward. Its movements were slow, deliberate, like it knew I had nowhere to go. I backed up, my heart racing as it crossed the threshold into the room. There was something wrong about it. Its limbs too long, its head tilting in a way that no humans should. The air around it seemed to warp, like the shadows clung to it, twisting in unnatural ways. It reached out, its hand pale and thin, fingers unnaturally long. The moment those fingers brushed the air between us, I felt a cold so intense it burned. My vision blurred, and the room seemed to spin around me. Then, as quickly as it came, it stopped. The figure was gone. I collapsed to the floor, gasping for air, my heart pounding in my chest. I didn't know what had just happened, but I knew one thing for sure. I wasn't alone anymore. Something had followed me, and it wasn't going to leave. After that night in the hotel, I knew I couldn't run anymore. Wherever I went, whatever I did, it wasn't going to stop. The thing, whatever it was, wasn't confined to my apartment, and I was stupid to think that leaving would solve anything. It wanted me to know it could find me, and now it had. I couldn't go back to my apartment, not after what I'd seen. So, I stayed on the move. Another hotel, then another, never the same place twice. But no matter where I went, I felt it. The weight of something watching me. It was like I could feel eyes on me every second of the day, even when I was alone. Especially when I was alone. At first, I tried to act like everything was normal, sticking to public places, staying out of dark alleys and quiet streets. I figured if I was around people, if I kept moving, whatever was happening might fade. Maybe it needed the darkness. Maybe it needed isolation. But that's the thing. There's a loneliness that settles in even when you're surrounded by others. It clings to you, wraps around you like a shadow you can't escape. I noticed that more and more. One day, while sitting in a crowded cafe, I caught sight of my reflection in the window. I'd been avoiding mirrors, not really wanting to see myself. I hadn't been sleeping, hadn't been eating much. I knew I'd look like hell, but that wasn't what unsettled me. It was the other reflection. Just behind me, at the far end of the cafe, a shadow shifted. It was subtle, just a ripple of darkness that shouldn't have been there. I spun around, scanning the room.
People were chatting, scrolling through their phones, completely unaware. No one was looking at me, but the shadow was there. I could feel it, always just out of sight, just beyond the edge of my vision. I left the cafe immediately, walking faster than I probably should have, heart pounding. I didn't stop until I was back in my rented car, doors locked, hands gripping the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles turned white. I sat there, staring out the windshield, trying to calm my racing thoughts. That's when my phone buzzed. I didn't want to look at it. I knew who it was from, but I couldn't ignore it. My hand trembled as I pulled my phone from my pocket and glanced at the screen. It was another email from that same address. The subject line this time was different, though. "You're almost ready." My stomach twisted into knots as I opened the message, my eyes scanning the brief, clinical text inside. "We've unlocked what was hidden. You're almost complete. Do not resist." There was an attachment, another PDF. I hesitated, my thumb hovering over the file. I didn't want to open it. I didn't want to see what was inside. But I couldn't stop myself. My curiosity, my damn insatiable curiosity, took over again. I opened the file. It wasn't a report this time. It was a picture of me, sitting in the cafe, right where I'd been a few minutes ago. The photo was from behind, like someone had taken it from across the room. I could see myself staring out the window, oblivious to the fact that I was being watched. The detail was crystal clear, like it had been taken from just a few feet away. But that wasn't the worst part. In the photo, directly behind me, was the figure. The same gaunt, twisted figure from the hotel. It was hunched, almost blending into the shadows, its pale fingers reaching toward me. But no one else seemed to notice. Not a single person in the cafe reacted to it. They were all going about their business, completely unaware. I stared at the image, feeling bile rise in my throat. My hand shook as I tried to close the email, but then another message came through. "Don't turn around." I dropped the phone, my heart thudding in my chest. I couldn't help it. My body acted on instinct. I turned around in the car, eyes scanning the parking lot, expecting to see the figure standing there, watching me. But it wasn't there. Instead, in the reflection of the rearview mirror, I saw something far worse. There, in the backseat of the car, was a dark figure. Its face was partially obscured, but I could see its eyes, glowing, pale orbs staring straight through me, unblinking. Its head tilted at an unnatural angle, as if it didn't understand how human bodies were supposed to move. My breath caught in my throat. I couldn't scream, couldn't even move. I just stared, frozen in place, as the thing reached forward, its hand hovering inches from the back of my neck. And then, in a voice that was barely more than a whisper, I heard it speak. "You are not alone." The voice wasn't like anything I'd ever heard. It wasn't human. It was deep, hollow, like a whisper carried on the wind, reverberating inside my skull. I could feel the words more than hear them, like they were being drilled into my mind, echoing over and over. I don't know how I managed to move, but somehow I snapped out of my paralysis. I shoved the car door open, tumbling out onto the pavement. I didn't look back. I couldn't. I scrambled to my feet, heart hammering in my chest, and ran. I ran until my legs felt like they would give out. I didn't stop until I was sure I was far enough away, in a place where people could see me, where I wouldn't be alone. But deep down, I knew it didn't matter. Whatever this thing was, wherever it had come from, it wasn't bound by distance or location. It was in me. It had always been in me, ever since I took that damn test. I collapsed onto a bench, gasping for breath, my mind racing. There was no escaping this, no running, no hiding. And the worst part? I wasn't sure if I even wanted to anymore. Because some part of me, some deep, dark part I didn't understand, felt drawn to it, like it had unlocked something in me, something that had always been there, buried beneath the surface. The more I thought about it, the less afraid I became. Maybe I was almost ready. I sat on that bench for hours, watching people pass by, completely unaware of the storm raging inside me. I don't know what I was waiting for, some kind of sign, some moment of clarity, but all I felt was that growing, gnawing pull. It was like something inside me had woken up, and now it wanted more. The fear that had gripped me for days was starting to shift into something else, something darker. I couldn't fight it anymore. When I finally stood up, it was already getting dark. The sky had turned a bruised purple, the kind of color that makes you feel like the night's going to last forever. I didn't go back to the car. I couldn't bear to look at it. I just walked, aimless, through the streets, trying to figure out what to do next. The world around me felt distant, like I was moving through a dream. Sounds muffled, colors bleeding into one another. And that's when I felt it, that presence again. Only this time, it wasn't lingering just out of sight. It was closer. I could feel it following me, keeping pace. Every time I looked over my shoulder, there was nothing there. But I knew it was there. It was always there. I don't know why I kept walking. Maybe I was tired of running. Maybe I needed to confront it. Or maybe, deep down, some part of me wanted to know the truth. The streets started to empty as I moved farther from the city center, the lights growing fewer and farther between. I didn't even realize where I was heading until I saw it. My apartment. I hadn't planned on coming back. I didn't want to be here. But somehow, I had ended up at my own front door, staring at the same building I had run from days ago. It was like I'd been drawn here, like something had been pulling me back all along. My hand trembled as I reached for the door, the key cold and heavy in my fingers. The moment the lock clicked open, I felt it, a wave of cold air rushing out, like the place had been waiting for me. I stepped inside. The apartment was dark, the kind of dark that felt alive, pressing in from all sides. But I didn't need light to know where everything was. I could feel the space around me, sense every detail, the creak of the floor beneath my feet, the faint smell of dust in the air. It all felt familiar, too familiar. The door closed behind me with a soft click, and the temperature dropped. I stood there, in the middle of the living room, my breath visible in the icy air. My heart was racing, but it wasn't out of fear anymore. It was anticipation. I wasn't alone. I could feel them. The shadows. They were in the room with me, lurking just beyond the edge of the light spilling in from the street outside. The darkness seemed to pulse, shifting in ways that shouldn't have been possible. And then I saw them. Figures, barely more than silhouettes, moving in the corners of the room. Twisted, gaunt shapes that seemed to stretch and warp as they moved. But I didn't run. I couldn't. Instead, I stepped forward, my eyes fixed on the largest of the figures. It stood in the far corner, its body bent and unnatural, its eyes glowing faintly in the darkness. The same figure that had appeared in the hotel, in the car, in my dreams. It spoke again, that same hollow, echoing voice that reverberated in my skull. "You're ready now." The words hung in the air, vibrating through me. I opened my mouth to speak, to say something, anything, but no words came. My throat felt tight, like I'd forgotten how to form sounds. But it didn't matter. Somehow, I knew it understood me. The figure moved closer, gliding across the floor in a way that made no sound. It loomed over me, its pale face coming into view for the first time. It wasn't human. I had known that all along. But seeing it up close,
The way its skin seemed to ripple and shift like liquid made it painfully clear. It reached out with one long, twisted hand, its fingers brushing my forehead. The touch was ice cold, but beneath the cold, there was something else, something electric. A surge of energy rippled through me, like I'd been plugged into some unseen current. My vision blurred, and for a moment, I felt like I was floating, disconnected from my own body. The shadows around me began to whisper. At first, it was just a low hum, like the wind in the distance. But soon, the whispers grew louder, filling my ears with words I couldn't understand. They weren't speaking English. They weren't speaking any language I'd ever heard. But somehow, I understood. They were telling me the truth. My DNA. The test hadn't been wrong. I wasn't entirely human. That 14%, the classified part, wasn't just some error. It wasn't some glitch. It was real. And whatever it wasn't from this world. I saw flashes, memories that weren't mine, images of places I'd never been, ancient places, dark, hidden places beneath the earth, where the light never reached. I saw figures like the one standing before me, long-limbed and pale, their eyes glowing in the darkness. They weren't human either, but they were old, older than anything I could comprehend. And they had been waiting for me. I was one of them. The realization hit me like a tidal wave, knocking the breath from my lungs. I staggered back, my mind reeling, trying to process what I had just seen. But the figure didn't let me retreat. It reached out again, its fingers wrapping around my wrist with a strength that belied its thin, fragile appearance. "You were never meant to be one of them," it whispered, its voice low and resonant. "You belong to us." The words settled deep in my bones, resonating with a truth I couldn't deny. All my life, I'd felt like something was missing, like I didn't quite fit into the world around me. And now I knew why. I wasn't part of this world. The thing inside me, the thing that had been unlocked by the test, it was waking up. I could feel it now, pulsing beneath my skin, like a second heartbeat. And the more I gave into it, the less human I felt. My senses had sharpened, my body had changed, but that was only the beginning. The figure released me, stepping back into the shadows. The others followed, their forms dissolving into the darkness like smoke. But before they disappeared completely, the voice spoke one last time. "You'll see us again soon." And then, they were gone. The apartment was silent, the cold air dissipating as quickly as it had come. I stood there, alone, in the middle of the room, my mind still spinning. I knew what I had to do now. There was no escaping it, no running from it. I wasn't human anymore, at least not fully, and soon I wouldn't be at all. I joined a dark web cult, dedicated to a forgotten god. Now I can feel its presence growing inside me. Okay, I know how this sounds, but just hear me out before passing judgment. I've been sitting on this story for months, debating whether I should even tell anyone. To be honest, I've always been that guy who enjoys dipping his toes into the weird corners of the internet, not out of some dark fascination, but more out of curiosity. You know, the kind of guy who watches obscure YouTube videos at 3 a.m. about things like conspiracy theories, lost media, or creepy ARGs, that kind of stuff. But I never thought things could get this real. It all started with a pretty typical Friday night for me. I'd just finished my shift, came home, cracked open a beer, and booted up my computer. I had nothing planned, so I figured I'd browse through Reddit and maybe watch some weird videos on YouTube. I came across a post in our deep web about the usual "stay away from this website" type of warning. Most of the comments were jokes. People trying to spook others with stories about hitmen for hire or cursed sites. But one comment stood out to me. It was just a single sentence. Have you ever heard of the forgotten God? Join us. It's not what you think. That one line sat with me for way too long. Like, it wasn't even directly a warning or anything. It was more like an invitation. I was intrigued, though. It had no upvotes or replies, but something about it felt personal, as if it was directed at me. Being the curious idiot I am, I clicked on the user's profile. Nothing there, just a blank account with no history, which wasn't surprising since people often do that for deep web-related stuff. There was, however, a link in their bio. It wasn't one of those sketchy, onion URLs you hear about in deep web horror stories. It was just a regular-looking site, nothing too alarming. Against my better judgment, I clicked it. The page that loaded up was disturbingly plain. It was all black, with a small box in the middle that just said, "Welcome. Answer truthfully." Below it were 3 questions. Do you believe in gods? Would you like to see something most people aren't meant to see? Are you willing to let go of the world you know for something greater? I'll admit, it felt like some pretentious, philosophical nonsense. But I don't know. I felt drawn to it. I answered yes to all 3 questions, even though I didn't really understand what letting go of the world I know meant. I figured it was some elaborate prank, and I half expected to get rickrolled. The screen flickered, and a new box popped up. This time it said, "You're one of us now. Prepare yourself." I didn't even have time to react before my screen went black. And that's when things started getting weird. Suddenly, my speakers let out this low humming sound, something like a cross between static and a deep chant, almost like monks murmuring in a language I couldn't understand. At first, I thought my computer had crashed, but the audio continued even when I unplugged my speakers. I tried to close the window, but nothing worked. I couldn't even turn off my computer. My heart started racing, and I'll admit, I was freaking out a little. I'd been on sketchy parts of the internet before, but I'd never had my computer outright taken over like this. Then, my monitor flickered back on, and the same black page appeared, but this time, there was a symbol in the middle of the screen. It was an eye, surrounded by jagged, claw-like marks. Underneath it were the words, "You've been chosen." I don't know why, but I suddenly felt cold, like the temperature in the room had dropped by 20 degrees. I swear I could feel something watching me through the screen, like a presence just beyond my computer, lurking. My stomach knotted up, and every instinct was telling me to shut it all down and leave it alone. But, like a complete idiot, I stayed. That's when the symbol vanished, and a countdown timer appeared. It was counting down from 1 hour. Underneath the timer, there was one last message. You have 1 hour to prepare for the arrival. I'm not ashamed to admit it. I slammed my laptop shut, like that was going to stop whatever was happening. My mind was racing, trying to rationalize it. Maybe it was some elaborate malware prank. I mean, the deep web is known for this kind of thing, right? But it didn't feel like a joke. It felt personal. I grabbed my phone to Google the symbol and what the hell the forgotten god even meant, but I couldn't find anything. Not even the usual creepy forums or 4chan threads mentioned it. My phone suddenly vibrated in my hand, and when I looked down, I had an email notification. It was from an address I didn't recognize, theforgotten1@null.com. I hesitated, but curiosity got the better of me. The email was blank, except for a single line. He's coming for you. Accept him, or suffer. I'm not going to lie. My heart skipped a beat. What was this? It was some ARG.
Some twisted cult recruitment tactic? I checked the time, and there were only 47 minutes left on the countdown. That's when my lights flickered and my computer powered back on its own. It was like the rabbit hole had just gotten deeper, and now I had no way out. I don't know how to explain what happened next. The moment my laptop powered back on, I felt this deep, unsettling presence in the room with me. You ever have that feeling where you think someone's standing right behind you, watching your every move? It was like that, but worse. It felt heavy, like the air itself had thickened. I couldn't shake the sense that whatever this arrival was, it wasn't just some dumb internet hoax. The countdown was back on the screen, 43 minutes left. And the eye symbol had returned, glowing faintly on my monitor, pulsing like a heartbeat. There was something almost hypnotic about it, like it was drawing me in. But at the same time, I felt repulsed, like my body was fighting against whatever this thing was. I forced myself to stand up and move away from my desk, but my legs were shaking. I tried to laugh it off, telling myself it was all in my head, that I was just overreacting. Maybe it was some weird malware or a freak virus meant to scare idiots like me who wandered too far into the deep web. But as I turned away from the screen, the humming started again, louder this time. That low, rumbling chant I'd heard earlier was back, but now it wasn't coming from my speakers. It was coming from everywhere. I could hear it vibrating through the walls, through the floor, like the very foundation of my apartment was buzzing with this unholy sound. And this time, I swear, there were voices. Deep, guttural voices, whispering in a language I couldn't understand, but it sounded ancient, primal, like something that didn't belong in this world. I don't know why I did this, but I grabbed my phone and tried to record it. Maybe I wanted proof to convince myself that this was real. But when I hit record and played it back, the audio was just static. No humming, no chanting, just that eerie white noise. I threw my phone down on the couch, trying to calm my breathing. The timer was ticking down, 37 minutes now. I kept telling myself I had time to shut everything off and leave, maybe even call someone, but then I noticed something that made my blood run cold. My front door. The deadbolt had been unlocked. I hadn't touched it. Now, I'm not exactly paranoid, but I'm careful. I always keep my doors locked. The fact that it was unlocked, especially after everything that was happening, sent alarm bells ringing in my head. I moved slowly toward the door, half expecting someone to be standing on the other side. My hand shook as I reached for the lock, trying to twist it back into place, but the moment my fingers touched the metal, the lights in the apartment went out. Not just a flicker this time. Total darkness. The only light now came from the dim glow of my laptop screen, casting weird, distorted shadows across the walls. The chanting grew louder, more urgent, and the air got even colder. My breath fogged in front of me, and I could feel this pressure building, like something was pushing its way into the room, into my mind. And then I saw it. I don't know how else to describe it. A shadow, darker than the surrounding blackness, moving in the corner of the room. It wasn't just a trick of the light. I could see it shifting, growing. It was tall, impossibly tall, its form too thin, almost skeletal, with long, spindly limbs that seemed to stretch and bend in ways that didn't make sense. But it didn't move like a person. It glided, like it wasn't bound by the same rules of physics the rest of us were. I couldn't see a face, but I could feel it watching me. Panic surged through me, my mind screaming to run, to get out of there. But my body was frozen. My limbs wouldn't respond. It was like I was pinned in place, forced to watch as this thing slowly approached, its presence filling the room with this suffocating dread. I don't know how long I stood there, paralyzed by fear.
But at some point, the chanting stopped. The silence that followed was even worse. It was like the entire world had gone still, like even the air wasn't moving anymore. Then, from behind me, my laptop spoke. "Accept him." The voice wasn't human. It was distorted, mechanical, but there was something ancient beneath it, like something crawling out of the deepest pit of the earth. The words echoed in my head, and I felt this strange, overwhelming urge to kneel. I don't know how else to explain it, but it was like my mind wasn't my own anymore. I could feel my knees buckling, my body collapsing to the floor in front of my laptop, like some unseen force was guiding me, pushing me down. My eyes were locked on the screen, and the symbol of the eye was burning brighter now, almost blinding, but I couldn't look away. The shadow thing loomed behind me, its presence almost tangible. I could feel it, cold, dark, and ancient, like it had been waiting for this moment, for me. The timer hit 0. My laptop screen flashed, and then there was nothing. Just black. I sat there, in the dark, on my knees, feeling this immense, suffocating pressure all around me. I wanted to scream, but no sound came out. The chanting started again, but this time, it was inside my head. It was everywhere, seeping into my mind, twisting my thoughts, filling me with this deep, sickening dread. And then the voice returned. "He's inside you now." I don't remember much after that. I think I blacked out, or maybe I just lost track of time. When I finally came to, the lights were back on, my laptop was powered off, and the air in my apartment felt normal again, like nothing had happened, but something had changed. There's this feeling now, deep inside me, like a gnawing presence that won't go away. I try to shake it, but it's always there, just beneath the surface, whispering, waiting. I keep seeing things out of the corner of my eye, shadows that move when they shouldn't, figures that disappear when I turn my head. I try to tell myself it's just paranoia, but I know better. Whatever I let in that night, it's still here, and I think it's getting stronger. The days after that night were a blur. I tried to go back to normal, tried to act like everything was fine. You ever have one of those nightmares that feels too real, and you wake up trying to convince yourself it was all just in your head? That's what I kept telling myself, that I'd imagined the whole thing. But deep down, I knew better. The feeling inside me, it wasn't going away. It was like a cold, coiled snake resting deep in my chest, just waiting for the right moment to strike. I started to notice little things first. Objects weren't where I left them. My keys, my phone, small stuff that could have easily been misplaced, but I knew I hadn't touched them. And then there were the whispers. At first, they were faint, barely noticeable. It was like hearing someone talk in another room, too far away to make out the words. But over time, the whispers got louder, more distinct. I couldn't tell where they were coming from, but it felt like they were all around me, like the walls themselves were alive and murmuring secrets I wasn't meant to hear. One night, I woke up around 2 a.m. I don't know why, but I had this overwhelming sense of dread, like something was wrong. I sat up in bed, listening. That's when I heard it, soft footsteps in my apartment. But here's the thing, I live alone. My heart was pounding in my chest, and I could feel that same cold, creeping presence from before. The footsteps were slow, deliberate, moving from room to room. They stopped right outside my bedroom door. I held my breath, staring at the door, waiting for something to happen. I don't know how long I stayed like that, frozen in place, my mind racing with all the worst possible scenarios. But eventually, the footsteps moved away, fading into the distance. I heard them stop in the living room. I tried to tell myself it was nothing, that maybe I was dreaming again, but there was something off about the air. It felt heavy, thick, like the room was pressing in on me. I felt a sudden urge to get up and check, even though every part of me was screaming to stay in bed and pretend nothing was happening. Grabbing my phone for light, I slowly crept out of bed and pushed the door open, my hands shaking. The hallway was dark, but I could still hear that faint, rhythmic whispering, almost like chanting. It was coming from the living room. I stepped forward, forcing myself to move, and as I turned the corner into the living room, my heart nearly stopped. The figure from that night, the shadow, it was standing in front of my couch. But it wasn't just standing there, it was growing. Its form shifted and stretched, impossibly tall, its limbs elongating and bending at angles that made my skin crawl. It seemed like it was absorbing the darkness, pulling it in, becoming one with it. And then it turned. I still couldn't make out a face, but I knew it was looking directly at me. My phone's flashlight flickered wildly, casting distorted, jittering beams of light around the room, and in that split second, I saw something I'll never forget. Eyes, hundreds of them, opening all at once across its shifting, shadowy form. Bloodshot and unblinking, they stared at me, each one filled with a primal hunger, like they were waiting for something. That's when the whispering stopped, and for the first time, I heard it clearly. He is coming. You will be his vessel. The voice wasn't just in my head anymore. It was coming from the figure itself, its mouth, or what I assumed was a mouth, moving, though I still couldn't see its true shape. The words sent a jolt of icy fear through me, but there was something else underneath the fear, something that terrified me even more. Recognition. I realized, deep down, that part of me knew what this thing was talking about. I couldn't explain it, but that presence inside me, the one that had been gnawing at my inside since that night, it was responding to the shadow, almost like it was welcoming it. Suddenly, the room went pitch black. My phone died in my hand, and the only thing I could hear was the blood rushing in my ears. My instincts kicked in, and I stumbled back, crashing into the wall behind me. I scrambled, feeling along the wall for the light switch, praying that if I could just get the lights on, this thing would disappear. But when I flipped the switch, nothing happened. The power was out. I stood there, breathing heavily in the suffocating darkness, and then I heard the figure again. This time, it was closer. There is no escape. I could feel its cold breath on the back of my neck. My skin prickled, and every fiber of my being screamed at me to run, but I couldn't move. It was like my body was no longer mine to control. My legs locked up, and my vision blurred as if I was falling into some kind of waking nightmare. Then, in the darkness, I felt something touch me, not like a physical hand or anything, but more like an icy current of air, brushing against my skin. It sent a shock through me, like electricity, and I could feel that thing inside me stir, almost like it was waking up, responding to the figure's touch. I gasped, my body finally releasing from its paralysis, and I bolted for the front door. I didn't stop to grab anything. No wallet, no keys, nothing. I just ran. I threw open the door and sprinted out into the hallway, my breath coming in ragged, panicked bursts. As I ran, I heard that voice again, echoing through my apartment, growing fainter but more insistent. You cannot run from him. You are already his. I didn't stop running until I was halfway down the street, the cold night air stinging my lungs. I didn't care where I was going. I just needed to get away. But even now, as I sit in this dingy motel room, miles from my apartment, I know deep down that running won't save me, because the whispers,
They're still there, faint but constant, and the presence inside me, it's growing. I can feel it, taking up more space in my mind, like it's feeding off my fear, my desperation. I don't know what's going to happen next, but I have a horrible feeling that it's only a matter of time before he comes for me, and I'm not sure I'll be able to stop him. I stayed at that motel for what felt like days, but in reality, it was only a couple of hours. Time didn't make sense anymore. I couldn't think straight. Every noise outside my room, the creak of footsteps in the hallway, the hum of the old ice machine, set me on edge. I kept expecting to hear that voice again, the one that had followed me out of my apartment, that sick, distorted promise echoing in my mind. You are already his. I tried to convince myself that I'd escaped, that whatever had latched onto me was left behind in my apartment, but deep down, I knew it wasn't true. The presence was still there, coiled up inside me, just waiting. Every time I closed my eyes, I could feel it moving, slithering through my thoughts, whispering things just out of reach. I tried drowning it out with the TV, but nothing helped. My head was pounding, my body felt like it was going to collapse, and the whispers were only getting louder. I didn't sleep that night. When the sun finally started to rise, I felt a strange sort of relief, like daylight would somehow keep the darkness at bay. But it was just an illusion. The shadows never really went away. They just hid in plain sight. Around noon, I got a knock on the door. I hadn't told anyone where I was. I hadn't called anyone, hadn't sent any messages. So when I heard the knock, my stomach sank. I stayed completely still, listening. Another knock, louder this time. I got up slowly and looked through the peephole, praying it was just housekeeping or some random guest looking for the wrong room. But when I peered through the tiny lens, my blood went cold. There was no one there. I stepped back, heart hammering in my chest. The knocking continued, steady, almost impatient now, but no matter how many times I checked the peephole, the hallway was empty. I'm not proud of what I did next, but I grabbed the chair from the desk and wedged it under the doorknob, like that would somehow keep whatever was out there from getting in. My hands were shaking so badly I almost dropped it. The knocking stopped as soon as I did it, like whoever, or whatever, was on the other side knew exactly what I was doing. The silence that followed was worse. Thick, oppressive. I could feel the air pressing down on me, and the whispers inside my head grew louder, more insistent. And then, just when I thought it was over, a new sound emerged. Scratching. It started low, like nails dragging across wood, slowly, methodically. It came from just outside the door, moving up and down like something was testing the barrier. My breath caught in my throat. I backed away from the door, my mind racing. I could hear my own pulse in my ears, a frantic rhythm that matched the scratching. I didn't want to look through the peephole again, but I couldn't stop myself. I leaned in, slowly, my eye just inches from the glass. That's when I saw it. There, in the sliver of view the peephole gave me, was a figure. Dark, indistinct, but very much there. It stood too close to the door for me to make out any real details, but I could see its outline, impossibly tall, its head tilted slightly toward the ground. Long, twisted limbs hung at its sides, not moving, just waiting, watching. I pulled back from the door, every muscle in my body screaming to run. But where could I go? The whispers were louder now, almost deafening, and I could feel that cold presence growing inside me, tightening its grip on my mind. He's here. I don't know how I knew it, but I did. The thing outside my door,
the thing that had been following me since that night. It wasn't just a shadow. It wasn't just a figment of my imagination. This was him, the forgotten god, or whatever cursed being I'd let into my life. And now, he was here to claim me. The scratching stopped, replaced by a low, guttural sound. It wasn't quite a growl, but more like a deep, vibrating hum, the same kind I'd heard coming from my laptop that night. The vibrations shook the walls, the floor beneath my feet, until it felt like the entire motel room was shuddering under the weight of it. And then, the lights went out. Pitch black. I couldn't see my hand in front of my face. The only sound was my own ragged breathing, and that awful, vibrating hum which was growing louder, filling the room with its unnatural cadence. I backed up into the far corner, heart pounding, trying to stay calm, trying to think. But there was no time. The doorknob rattled, and the chair I'd wedged beneath it slid across the floor like it weighed nothing at all. I wanted to scream, but my throat locked up. I couldn't move, couldn't breathe. The door creaked open, inch by inch, and the shadows outside flooded in like a wave. They weren't normal shadows. They moved, alive, twitching and writhing like they had a mind of their own. And then, in the doorway, I saw it. Him. He was massive, filling the space, his body a mass of shifting, shadowy limbs, and those eyes. God, those eyes, opening and closing all over his form. They blinked in unison, staring straight at me, unblinking, unrelenting. I felt the presence inside me stir, like it was recognizing him, like it was part of him. My chest tightened, and I could barely stand. My legs buckled beneath me, and I collapsed to the floor, gasping for breath. The figure took a step forward, its limbs bending and contorting unnaturally, as if the laws of this world didn't apply to it. Every instinct I had was telling me to run, but there was nowhere to go. He reached out a hand, long, spindly fingers that seemed to stretch forever, and I could feel the cold radiating from him as he approached. My body felt like it was shutting down, my mind filling with that terrible static, the whispers growing louder until they drowned out everything else. You will be his. The voice echoed through my skull, shaking every thought loose, and as his fingers brushed against my forehead, I felt something inside me break. A surge of cold flooded through me, freezing me from the inside out. My vision blurred, and the world around me seemed to tilt, spinning in and out of focus. I could feel that presence, the thing I'd let in, merging with me, overtaking my mind, swallowing me whole. And then, everything went silent. I don't remember what happened after that. The next thing I knew, I was lying on the floor, alone. The door was closed. The lights were back on. It was like nothing had happened. But I knew better. I could feel him inside me now. Not just a whisper, not just a presence. He's part of me. And I don't know how much longer I can keep him at bay. I don't know how long I stayed on that floor, staring at the ceiling, trying to make sense of everything. The motel room was eerily quiet, too still, like the world was holding its breath. It took a while for me to realize I was shaking, every muscle in my body tensed, my mind racing. But no matter how hard I tried, I couldn't shake the feeling that something had changed. I wasn't the same person who walked into that room. He was in me now. At first, it was subtle, a creeping sensation just under my skin, like I wasn't alone in my own body anymore. His presence wasn't just lingering, it had settled in, and I could feel it moving, taking root. It felt like my thoughts weren't entirely mine anymore. There was always this shadow lurking behind them, whispering things I couldn't quite make out, urging me to do things I didn't want to do. The first real sign that something was wrong came later that night. I had tried to sleep, but every time I closed my eyes, I'd hear that low, rhythmic hum in the back of my skull. It was like a distant pulse, faint at first, but getting stronger every time I tried to ignore it. When I finally gave up on sleep and dragged myself into the bathroom to splash some water on my face, I caught sight of myself in the mirror. I almost didn't recognize the person staring back at me. My skin was pale, like all the life had drained out of it, and my eyes. God, my eyes. They were bloodshot, rimmed with dark circles, but it was something else that made my stomach turn. There was a flicker in them, a brief flash, like something was watching me from behind my own reflection. For a split second, I saw it, those same unblinking eyes that I'd seen in the shadow. They were inside me now, peering out through my own gaze. I backed away from the mirror, heart racing, but the image stuck with me. I could feel him in every part of me now, an unwelcome invader, taking control, piece by piece. I tried to fight it, tried to hold on to who I was, but it was like trying to hold back a tide with your bare hands. The more I resisted, the stronger he became. The whispers weren't just in the background anymore. They were getting louder, clearer, like a voice speaking directly into my mind, telling me things I didn't want to hear. You are mine. I started blacking out after that. I'd lose hours at a time, waking up in strange places without any memory of how I got there. Once, I woke up in the middle of a field, miles from the motel, my clothes drenched in sweat, dirt under my fingernails, and my hands shaking uncontrollably. Another time, I found myself standing in front of my apartment, the door wide open, even though I hadn't been there since I'd run out. Each time I woke up, I felt less like myself. It was like pieces of me were slipping away, being replaced by him. The presence was no longer content to just exist inside me. It was taking over. And the worst part, I could feel myself accepting it. I didn't want to, but there was this growing sense of inevitability, like fighting him was pointless. Every time I resisted, the whispers would return, louder, more insistent, until I couldn't tell if they were his thoughts or mine. One night, I woke up standing in front of a mirror again, but this time, I wasn't alone. The reflection wasn't me, it was him. The figure in the mirror was taller, darker, with those same unnerving eyes. They blinked in unison, hundreds of them, staring back at me with a cold, detached hunger. I couldn't move, couldn't look away. My reflection smiled, but it wasn't my smile. It was his. He spoke, and this time, the voice wasn't just in my head. It echoed through the room, deep and distorted. You are ready. I tried to scream, tried to run, but my body wouldn't listen. I was a prisoner in my own skin, forced to watch as the figure in the mirror raised a hand, and I felt my own hand move with it. That's when I knew. I wasn't me anymore. I was something else, something worse. The next few days were a blur of confusion and fear. I was still aware of myself, but only barely. He was in control now, guiding my actions, pushing me towards something I didn't understand. I started seeing things that weren't there, shadows moving in the corners of my vision, strange symbols etched into the walls that I couldn't remember drawing, and always those eyes, watching from the darkness. I tried to resist, tried to hold on to what little remained of myself, but it was like fighting smoke. The more I struggled, the more I felt myself slipping away. The whispers were constant now, drowning out every other thought. Join him. Become one with him. I don't know how much longer I can hold on. I can feel him growing inside me, like a parasite, feeding on my fear, my desperation. Every time I look in the mirror, I see less of myself and more of him. His presence is overwhelming, suffocating, and I know, deep down, that soon there won't be anything left of me at all. I don't know what he wants. I don't know what I've become. But I can feel him, always there, watching, waiting. And the worst part? I don't think I even care anymore. Because maybe this was always supposed to happen. Maybe I was always meant to be his vessel. Maybe I was always meant to bring him into this world. He's here now, and soon he'll be everywhere.